WBAL TV in Baltimore, and I'm the moderator of this session. That would help, right? Okay, let's try that again. I'm Jayne Miller from WBAL Television in Baltimore, and I'm the moderator of the session on criminal justice. This is airing on C-SPAN as we go, and we have two very distinguished folks with us today who are the authors of two books. Both involve the criminal justice system. One of the cases has been resolved. One of the cases is very much active, and you're very familiar with it due to its publicity through a podcast. So let's get started by introducing Brian Stolarz, immediate right, and Rabia Chaudry to my further right over there. And I'm going to give each of these authors about 10 minutes each to tell you what they want you to hear about the books they've written and their perspectives on the criminal justice system. One involves Brian's case. Brian's an attorney. Both are attorneys. Brian is an attorney who represented a man on death row. Rabia is a family friend of a man currently incarcerated in the state of Maryland for a case that dates back to 1999. Brian going to go first?
I'm first because I'm the warm-up act for who everyone is here to see. It doesn't offend me that you came to see her, but I'll be the warm-up act. I'll be quick, I promise. Thank you, Jayne. I'm honored to be here at the Annapolis Book Festival. I love book festivals. Jayne, thank you for being here. We need strong, passionate journalists more than ever now, so keep up the work. Rabia, you are honestly one of the most critical voices in this country right now, and I'm honored to be on the panel with you for the Muslim community, for equality, for justice, and of course, for Adnan. So keep up your work. And I'm proud of the way you've dedicated 17 years of your life to your friend. And in that way, we have a bond. Because I spent 8 years representing Alfred Dwayne Brown. And I came to love the man. And I'm telling you all about this now. I can cry just sitting here. I can't believe I'm going to cry within a minute being on C-SPAN, but I might. I cried last time, so that's 2 for 2. But what you have done is you've started a cultural revolution about wrongful convictions and the death penalty and criminal justice. But I'm going to start you off with a quick story. When I was a third-year law student at Catholic University Law School, and I want to give a shout-out to the dean of the law school right there, Daniel Attridge, my man, thank you. Great dean, great law school, it's where you all should go. I was a third year, and you could represent your own clients. And I had a client who was charged with stealing a bike. I go to court, cross-examine the police officer, make hard arguments, but he gets found guilty. I go downstairs in the lockup, I say, hey man, I'm sorry, I worked really hard for you. He said, hey man, it's okay, I stole the bike. but what he said next was a rocket right to the heart of me. He said, thank you for standing up for me. I've been through this system so much and no one's ever cared about me, thank you. And there I was, not even a lawyer yet, and I already realized what my calling was. Then I was a public defender in Brooklyn, where I represented the innocent, the guilty, and everywhere in between. And I developed a pretty good bull meter. I could usually spot a criminal from a mile away now. And a quick scan of this room says, this side's okay, I'm not so sure about the people on this side of the room. Especially you in the front row, not so sure about you. No, I'm kidding, you seem very nice. So then I left the public defenders to go work at a large law firm in Washington, and I get a call one day from a senior partner saying, hey, you want to work on a pro bono death penalty case? And I say, absolutely, it'd be a dream job. I go down to Houston, Texas, drive 60 miles north to Livingston, a dreary death row prison on a country road, and I meet Alfred Dwayne Brown, who becomes the client of my life. And I meet him, and I know the moment I meet him that he's innocent, like a shot right to my heart, like when you meet your spouse for the first time, or you hold your kids for the first time, or truly a love that you feel deep down right away. And I go back out to the rental car right next to the prison, I throw up. Because the gravity set in on me right away. This was not Brooklyn, this was not a bike, this was Texas. And then I go to the Houston airport and I get some of that disgusting airport Chinese food that smells good but makes you sick, you know what I'm talking about? And I got a fortune, and I have it with me from 2007. It says, you love challenge. And I look up to the sky as a God-fearing man, I say, really? This is the challenge you're gonna give me? And I went back to Houston recently in October when the book came out, and I went back to that same Chinese food place looking for sort of a karmic circle from the fortune cookie, right? And in the movie version, it says something like, justice is served, or you're awesome, or wonderful, congratulations. And the one that I got said, pandas are cute. So no one could deny that fact, of course, but the karmic circle from the fortune cookie did not hold. Briefly about the crime, it was a very high-profile, heinous double murder in South Houston. 3 men robbed a check cashing store. One of the men received a 30-year sentence in exchange for his testimony against Dwayne, my client. Never any science that connected him, and never will be. No CSI stuff like on TV, no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing like that. What I began to realize is I was up against something much more than just Texas, though. Witnesses who identified him at the scene, the morning of the scene, said that they had seen him. I go interview those witnesses. One of them told me they saw him from 100 yards away, and I said, "You could see him that morning?" She said, "No." I said, "Well, then why did you say that at trial?" And then I began to get really worried because they said, the police and the DA came to me and said, "If you don't say that you saw Dwayne that morning, I'm going to take your kids away and make your life miserable." And I began to realize what I was up against here. Not just Texas, which is bad enough as it is, but a corrupt and dangerous system. Nowhere was this more apparent, though, than in the grand jury. If Dwayne was here right now, which I'd love for you to meet him one day, he said, and he would say right now, that he was home at his girlfriend's apartment at the time of the murders and made a phone call to where she worked. Very straightforward alibi. And his girlfriend, Erica Dockery, testified that way in the grand jury, firming up his alibi. And in a case with no science and an alibi witness, the DA didn't have a lot. But in the grand jury, Erica was pressured and threatened and said that if she doesn't say the truth, in air quotes, then they will take her kids away and make her life miserable. They put her in a locked cell and said, "If you don't say what I want, I'm going to make you a co-defendant in this murder." The DA, who did not have a great case, decided to charge her with perjury, put her in jail for 4 months, cooled her out. Her life began to crumble all around her. And finally she said, "Fine, I'll say whatever you want." So guys, the testimony and the evidence that put an innocent, decent man on death row and would have died but for the tireless work of my team. It's not just me, I get to tell the story, but my team. The grand jury was so corrupt in Texas, they had what's called a key man system, where a judge appoints a commissioner who brings friends to a grand jury. Friends, guys. Just like we would all say, "Let's go to the book festival." They would bring friends to the grand jury. And it was typically, with no offense to the people in the room, older white people sitting in judgment of minorities. And because of the work that we did on this case, we determined that the grand jury foreperson in this case was an active duty police officer. So you have an active duty police officer investigating a crime of a police officer shooting? That's simply not just. And I'm happy to tell you that because of the work on this case, Lisa Falkenberg of the Houston Chronicle won the paper's first Pulitzer Prize, which I thought was kind of cool. I thought I deserved at least a picture of a Pulitzer Prize or something, or a bottle of wine or something, because I gave her all the information. But the system now has changed. Texas now impanels grand juries the way every other state does. Those annoying letters you get in the mail to say, "Come to the grand jury." So I'm happy to see that we left Texas a lot more fair than we found it. But what this case really boiled down to was this phone call. And Dwayne would tell me, "Yeah, I made this phone call. I don't know why I'm here." And so we subpoenaed the phone company. They said they didn't have it. Subpoenaed the cops. They didn't have it. Subpoenaed the DA. They didn't have it. And I'd go back down to death row and I'd be so depressed. Health problems, emotional. I couldn't sleep a lot of days. And I'd go see him and I'd be so depressed and so sad. And I'd say, "I can't find this phone record. I know you didn't do this crime, but I cannot find this phone record." And this man, who was in a solitary confinement cell that he could touch arm to arm, standing flat-footed, could touch the top 23 hours a day during the week, 24 hours on the weekend. This man in solitary confinement brought me peace and comfort and love. And I'd say to him, "I can't find these records." And he'd say to me, "It's okay. I believe in you. I still don't know why." And then, many, many years later, we received an email from the district attorney who was prosecuting the case to the judge in the case to say that the homicide detective in charge of the case was doing spring cleaning in his garage. Not kidding. The email says it. It's in the book. You should buy the book. You see it. Spring cleaning in his garage. And in the middle of the box that he found, spring cleaning in his garage, like a golden ticket shining out, was this, guys. A single piece of paper. A phone record showing that Dwayne had made the call he had been saying the whole time. But what's worse, attached to this was a subpoena from the trial DA. The trial DA subpoenaed the phone company the day after Erica testified in the grand jury that she made that call to see if she was telling the truth. And guess what? She was. But this was never turned over to the defense at trial. And we only got it because it was in a homicide detective's garage. This is not a John Grisham thriller, guys, I promise. This actually happened to an actual person who was a good and decent man. And because of that, ultimately, Dwayne was released on June 8th of 2015. And I like to say the best day of my life is when I met and married my wife. She's watching right now, so I got to say that. Happy anniversary, sweetie, by the way. Second, third, and fourth are the birth of the kids for you, Ella, Audrey, Andrew. Next day is when the 1986 Mets won the World Series. And then when Dwayne was released, if he's here, I flip him, but he's not here, so it's Mets first, then Dwayne. And then when the grand jury system was abolished. And I've talked really fast. I'm going to show you a few slides really quick because I really want you to see these images because they're so powerful to me. This was the Houston Chronicle's, go back one second. That was the Houston Chronicle's editorial the day he got out, and I love this. I have many copies. Next one, please. Dallas Morning News. Another big reason to rethink capital punishment. Think of that, right? A single document in a garage saved an innocent man's life. That can't be the system that we're holding on to here. Next, please. That's my daughter. I love this slide. It makes me emotional every time, but that's my middle, Audrey, when I got the case. And the next slide, please. That's how old she was on the right when Dwayne got out. Fantastic. I've cried again on C-SPAN. Oh my gosh. And that's her older sister, Ella, right there. And the next slide, please. And that's Dwayne on release day, guys. And that's his daughter, who was 2 when he went to jail. So I got all that time. I got to be with my daughters, but he did not. But what's beautiful about him is that he said on those steps right there that he has no hate in his heart for what they did to him. He said, you can't trust everyone, but you can love everyone. And this is a man who spoke of love and compassion for the people who almost took his life away. And that's why I wrote the book, because this is at heart a love story. I love this man. He has given me a purpose. So folks say that I helped save his life, but he saved mine. Next slide, please. That's another release date picture hugging his sister. Keep going, please. And I love this picture right here. I finally got to see him and hug him. Everything else was behind pane glass. So for 8 years I worked on this case. I could not touch the man. And I love him. I love to hug people. I'll hug all of you after this if you want. If you buy the book, I'll hug you twice. There's me hugging Dwayne. Next slide, please. This one is my what I call my badass slide. We have matching scales of justice tattoos. Mine's on my shoulder. If you buy 10 copies, I'll take my shirt off and show you. But I think that's pretty cool. It gets me a lot of credibility in my neighborhood. Next. That's what we had for lunch when he was released. He wanted oysters. He's from Louisiana after all. And he ate those. And there's his daughter. And the next picture, please, is one of my favorites. Look at that, guys. Reconnection. A reconnection with his daughter. And they're doing great. Next, please. I put this slide up there, although I hate it. I see a Yankee fan back there on the left. Sorry, I despise the Yankees. I told you earlier I'm a Mets fan. And so I say to him, hey, you're out. What do you want to do? It's your bucket list. He said, I want to go to Yankee Stadium. I said, damn it, why couldn't you be a Mets fan? So reluctantly, we went to Yankee Stadium. We had a friend who worked there, got us great seats, and a jersey personalized for him. That was a wonderful day. And it's my goal to make him catch up on the dates and the times and the things he has missed. Next, please. That's a horse, as you can see. He's living a peaceful, quiet life. I talked to him right before Christmas. I said, hey, what do you want for Christmas this year? And he texted me the next picture. The next slide, please. That. He was driving out west and he said, Brian, I have all I need. And I love this picture and I look at it all the time. And the next slide is the book, which you are all obligated to buy after this, because my kids need to go to college one day too. But I ran through it quickly. I'm happy to take questions afterwards. I'll be here afterwards to talk. But as I say, I wrote this because I wanted the world to see that a corrupt, broken system almost took the life of an innocent, decent man. And it is my job to tell the story, to inspire others to do this kind of work, so this does not happen again. Thank you.
Again, the name of the book is Grace and Justice on Death Row. The author is Brian Stolarz. And Brian, I must say that I been heavily involved in the Kirk Bloodsworth case in Maryland.
Sure.
I did a very lengthy investigative piece starting in 1988, and to your point of how it never leaves you, and I'm going to choke up when I say this, I will never forget the phone call that I got from Kirk in prison in 1992 after the DNA testing had been finally done that exonerated him. And I answered the phone, and it was a collect call, as I had gotten many from him, when he said, he could barely speak, "It shows it's not me." And I mean, you can't imagine a guy who was on death row. It's just unimaginable to experience the life of someone who was wrongfully convicted and may well have died for it. So the book is, there's parts of the book, and we don't even, maybe we'll talk about it in a second, but he talks about Antonin Scalia, the late Antonin Scalia, but maybe we'll get some time for that. But we want to move to Rabia Chaudry, whose book about the Adnan Syed case, which you are, it needs no introduction, I don't think, am I correct? But Rabia comes from a different place. She is a longtime family friend of the Syed family. This happens to be another case that I actually covered back in 1999 when it occurred. But I'm going to let Rabia tell you the story and her involvement in writing the book, and also her involvement, though, in the podcast. So go ahead.
All right, first of all, good morning to all of you, and thank you so much, Jayne and Brian. It's a real honor for me to be on this panel. I just want to say I haven't even started talking yet, and I cried 3 times during Brian's, but only with my right eye, so I hit it well. These are deeply emotional. There's a reason people stick to something for 8 years, 10 years, 20 years. It's because it won't let you go. So let me start by just... and I also want to say this. I want to commend Brian, because what Brian has done is something that I think tens of thousands of people around the country are doing on their own, doggedly, year after year, fighting for people without a spotlight, without the kind of public support, without the kind of publicity that we were blessed to get in Adnan's case. And that is a much harder fight. It's a much harder fight. So really, incredible work you've done. And let me first ask, okay, how many people have listened to the entire serial podcast of the first season? So, not as many as you'd think. You'd be surprised.
About half the room, right? That was about half the room, maybe a third of the room?
I'd say maybe a third of the room. Okay. So if you haven't listened to Serial, I'm assuming, how many people have actually read my book? All right. You two are my 3 are my favorite people in this room right now.
Me, I read it too.
Yeah, I said you're part of the 3. So let me set up the story a little bit for you. And I'll do that by reading the opening of my introduction into the book. Because that is, like, we all describe the moments that wedded us forever to these situations and to these people. So I'm going to read the opening passage because this is the moment that cemented me to this case, this issue forever. Now, I knew Adnan, and this is a picture of Adnan when he was in high school. Handsome young man, football player, junior prom king, all those good things. 17 years old. This picture was taken just a couple of months before he was arrested at 17 years old and taken out of his bed in front of his mother and his younger brother at like 5 a.m. in the morning and dragged off to the police station. You know, when he was dragged off, these are things for years he didn't tell us, but the entire ride, the police officers threatened him with the sexual assaults that he'd be facing in prison because he was such a pretty boy. He's a young man who had no criminal record and was an honor roll student and had a very bright future ahead of him. But I knew Adnan since he was about 13 or 14 years old because he was my younger brother's best friend. And I saw him around the house. And I used to say to my brother, stop hanging out with him because you're going to corrupt him. This is a great kid. I had a lot of love for Adnan, and the community did too. He was just a really genuinely good young man. He was a very respectful, very decent, very kind young man always. And on the morning of 1999, when he was arrested, it took about 2 days for us to, no, actually it was the same day, I think, that we found out that he was arrested for this murder. A murder which, for the last 6 weeks, I had been, for the 6 weeks prior to his arrest, I had been following this case in the Baltimore news. It had been covered heavily almost every week. This young girl, Heyman Lee, had disappeared after school one day from Woodlawn High School. And they couldn't find her. For a month, they didn't know where she went. So every week, I lived in Virginia, and I would visit my parents in Baltimore, and I would see this story online, on TV, and they would show her picture, still hasn't been found, still hasn't been found. Then her body was found. And after her body was found, obviously, the investigation intensified until they arrested Adnan. And I found out because, again, I was sitting in my parents' house watching TV, and Adnan's picture, they said an arrest had been made in the murder of Hae-Min Lee. And it was Adnan's picture. They lived two streets down from us. And I sat up on the sofa, like, what just happened? At this point, I was in law school. I was in my second year of law school. I never once represented Adnan as his attorney. I was offered, in fact, in law school, a position with the public defender's office, and I just couldn't do it for many reasons. This work is too difficult and emotional and draining for me to ever have had the courage to do. But for the first year, Adnan had been, he was held in prison until the trial began. And for that first year, I acted the way a big sister would. I was a family friend and a big sister. I was his big sister like I was a big sister to my brother. I would visit him, I'd write him letters. All of us thought, we come from an immigrant family, both of us come from immigrant families from Pakistan, where the justice system is so corrupt. It is so, people are terrified of police officers. They are terrified of the judiciary. But we had a lot of faith in the American justice system. We didn't think anything got done wrong here, especially in '99. Now there's a new level of awareness, but in '99, the whole community thought, they're going to get it right. There's been a mistake here. Adnan thought there's been a mistake here. It's going to get dropped. Something's going to happen. This will be fixed. So the first year, as we prepared for trial, we thought we just got to have to get through this. We'll get the best attorney we can get. We'll raise the funds we need. He had tremendous community support. Hundreds of people came to his bail hearing. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were put up, and his bail was denied. His bail was denied for two reasons. Number one, the judge thought he was over 18. His date of birth was written wrong on the charging documents. And when you're 18, you're not eligible for bail in a capital murder case. And this also was when the death penalty existed in Maryland. So the judge thought he didn't know he's a minor. And the second thing was the prosecution argued that this young man, born and raised in the United States, having visited Pakistan once or twice as a child, that he comes from a group of people, an ethnicity, a religion, that believes it's okay to kill young women. And these hundreds of people in this courtroom who are here to support him, they are the people who will help him leave and escape. They are not here to support him in the way that you think, Your Honor. They're going to make sure he can get out because it's okay in their culture to do this. And that was like a blow to us. It was like somebody had smacked us in the face and punched us in the gut. That is the moment we realized something else is going on here. This is not about a regular criminal homicide case. There is an ethnic and religious dynamic here that we didn't realize existed until that moment. I still had faith. I said, they're going to get it right. Until the day he was convicted. And so I'm going to read this passage, just the first page and a half. And I want to set it up because when Serial, which was an incredible production, beautiful storytelling, but told by people who also didn't understand our community, who had to talk about the Korean community and the Muslim American community in ways that they didn't quite understand. So when I wrote the book, I made sure all throughout the book to include frames of reference, whether it's stories from our scripture or other kinds of ways to understand like how we think about issues, whether it's sexuality, dating, because Hae-Min Lee was a young girl that Adnan had dated briefly in high school, which is why they connected him to it, that he was a jealous ex-boyfriend. So every chapter I open with some reference to a religious passage or something to understand how we understand a moment. And this is how I open this. Malik reported, Amir az-Zubair would stop speaking whenever he heard thunder, and he would say, "Glory to him," who said, "The thunder exalts his praise, as well as the angels from fear of him," him meaning God. That's a passage from our scripture, the Quran. Then Amir would say, this is a strong warning to the people of the earth. This passage comes from an 8th century book written by a very well-known scholar in the Muslim tradition, Imam Malik. And there's a reason that I started this passage, this introduction with this passage, and you'll understand for a minute. When Adnan was convicted, it thundered 3 times. The day was bright and sunny, but as we sat there clutching our hands while the foreman pronounced the verdicts, it thundered. February 25th, 2000 was a Friday, which was a good sign. Fridays are auspicious for Muslims. It's a blessed day, our day of sermons and congregational prayer, the day we start all new things with the Bismillah, invoking the name of God. I sat with Adnan's mother, Auntie Shameen, while other members of the community were scattered behind us. Auntie looked straight ahead stoically, a scarf draped over her head, sitting shoulder to shoulder with her oldest son. I prayed silently as the jury was brought in. On the other side of the wooden railing, Adnan stood with his lawyer. Tall and skinny, Facial hair coming in sparsely over his pale face, he was barely entering manhood. The foreman rose. On the first count, murder in the first degree, guilty. It thundered, and we all turned our heads, looking out the courtroom windows at the clear skies, stunned. On the second count, kidnapping by fraud, guilty. Then it thundered a second time, and again we turned our faces, scanning the sunny outdoors, confused. On the third count, robbery, guilty. It thundered again. This time I only glanced outside, keeping my face turned towards Adnan's slight figure, paralyzed. By the time the fourth count was read, false imprisonment, I had tuned out, my ears filled with a rush of blood. Closing arguments had been made only a few hours earlier. We had just begun contemplating where to eat lunch when we were called back to the courtroom. A verdict had been reached within a matter of hours. A fast and hard verdict. The weekend loomed ahead, after all. The bailiff approached Adnan, and he closed cuffs around his wrists and ankles, the same ones he had worn shuffling in and out of court day after day. There were audible gasps and sobs, some escaping me as I rocked back and forth in my seat, repeating, no, 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 this was not actually happening. We were told this was not going to happen. Then Adnan turned to us, his mother, his brother, his friends, his community, and said, it's okay, I didn't do it. Allah knows I didn't do it. So that moment, for me, was the moment that because until then, as a law student, as a family friend, I was involved very distantly. I thought, let the experts handle it. The community's got this. The lawyers got this. And that was the day I realized nobody had it. Everybody failed. And that evening, that same day, I went to see Adnan. And I said, Adnan, this whole case rests on half an hour. The prosecution says that after school, in that half an hour time frame, you killed her, you dumped her, and then you went to track practice. Where were you in that half an hour? And he said, that was like weeks. Weeks had passed. He said, every day after school, I just hung out at the school library. I don't have evidence. This is 99. We don't have smartphones. There's no way to track where somebody is. He had a cell phone, though, and that cell phone was very important in this case. And the interesting thing is he was convicted on the basis of that cell phone evidence, along with a witness who had been, like in Brian's case, in Dwayne's case, coerced, a witness who had been told, a young black man who was 19 years old in Baltimore, whose father and brother had spent years incarcerated, was told by the district attorney that I will charge you with the murder, and I will charge you in Baltimore County, which is a white county, and I will ask for the death penalty. It's you or it's him. That's what happened behind closed doors. We did not know this information until last year, when his attorney told me this is what happened to him. Because we didn't understand. Why is this young man out of nowhere providing evidence? There was DNA evidence collected from the victim's body, from Hayman and Ali's body, that the prosecutor told to put on hold, never got tested. You know, I want to say something, and because for those of you who listen to Serial, the few of you who did, for those of you who didn't, just listen to it even as entertainment. It's really a compelling story, but it's a small part of the story. A lot happened after Serial. Other independent investigators got involved. I got involved with 2 other attorneys, and we started our own podcast to go deep into Adnan's case in a way Serial didn't. Serial has almost 600 million downloads. We have almost 200 million downloads. People around the world are fascinated with this case. Adnan's conviction got overturned last year based on the same cell phone evidence that helped put him away. And as soon as it got overturned, the state appealed it. We have been fighting for 18 years. He was 17 when they took him. It's been 18 years now, and we are still fighting. We're fighting on the basis of the donations and the support we're getting from the community, and the state is fighting on the basis of our taxpayer dollars to keep him in, Even though they know that they had DNA they could have tested, they didn't do that deliberately. They had a witness that had to be coached over and over again who couldn't get his story straight. In the podcast, Sarah Koenig says, trying to understand Jay, who is the witness, his story is like trying to map out somebody's dream because it wasn't his story. It was a story that cops kept feeding to him until he got it right. There was cell phone evidence that could have exonerated Adnan, but nobody got it, just like in Dwayne's case. Incoming cell phone call records. The police either got it and lost it, and the defense was so incapacitated, she was later disbarred, then she died from a disease, that she also didn't do her job. Last thing I want to say is this, before we get into the moderated Q&A, that also in Serial, they make the comment that either Adnan is innocent or he's the unluckiest guy in the world. And that was said in kind of a sarcastic way. Every one of the thousands of wrongfully convicted people in this country are the unluckiest people in the world. It doesn't take one mistake to wrongfully convict a person. Every piece of this entire train has to be a wreck. From the police investigation to the prosecution, like in this case, having a document but not releasing it, to the jury not understanding what's happening in front of them, to the inherent biases we all carry, to the disparate sentencing that people of color get, to defense counsel that fail in their job and are not able to do their job for whatever reason, sometimes because they're prevented from it, because the state's attorney won't turn stuff over, and sometimes because they're just not good attorneys, and we have plenty of those. And there are tens of thousands of wrongfully convicted people. They're all the unluckiest people every single step of the way they were failed. These are systematic problems, but because they're systematic, I think they have systematic fixes. And you're going to find in all of these cases the same red flags. When there's no DNA evidence, when you have a witness whose story changes, look deeper. You have to look deeper. And when you have somebody who is maintaining their innocence for years and years and years, with a sense of calm and compassion and grace, pay attention to that person. Thank you.
Rabia, can you hold up your book? Just hold it up. So you all know that, there you go, Adnan's story. And you are, where is it exactly, at this moment, the case is where?
Well, the case, first of all, I do want to say this, that Adnan contributed to this book. His writings, contemporary, and also the letters over 17 years are part of the book. It is a New York Times bestseller, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't buy it anyways. Buy it anyways. His story has to still be told. What happened is we are now preparing for the next level of appeal because, like I said, the state's attorney appealed. The interesting thing is the prosecutor who was on the case, I think this is one of the oddest things I've ever heard, he left the state's attorney's office, so we assume the new prosecutor is going to be assigned to the case. He joined a private practice. He came back. He is working pro bono. He so believes in prosecuting Adnan till the end. He came back to work pro bono for the state to continue prosecuting the state. Have you ever heard that?
No.
I have never heard that.
He went from the state's attorney's office first to the attorney general's office.
Yes, he did.
And,
No, that's
now,
yeah.
right. And so I think that's why he's came back from, and yes, and then he went from the attorney general's office
Into private practice.
into private practice.
And now
yes.
he
with a
is-
very well-known law firm, by the way.
Right, and
Yes.
now he is being loaned back to the
So
state.
it's kind of the reverse of Brian's case.
Exactly,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, it is. It is.
And again, making a comment, in the Bloodsworth case here in Maryland, you know, what happened there was, while he was represented by the public defender's office the first time around. There were 2 trials. Second time he was represented by private defense, but then came back. Always the public defender at the time in Maryland said they were so believed in his innocence, they retained for him a lawyer out of Washington who's now a federal judge.
Yep.
And again, it's the same thing of having really capable legal representation goes a long way. So I'm going to start with this question because I'm going to, let's really think outside the box. Around the country, there's this move to be transparent about policing. So there's now cameras increasingly on police officers so that you can see exactly what happens when a police officer interacts with the public. Are we reaching a point, because of exactly the kinds of things you talk about with what goes on behind closed doors, with witnesses when they're questioned, what goes on, what's said to a defendant when he's in the back of the police wagon, are we reaching a point where maybe all of it should be recorded? Everything that happens from the time someone comes under suspicion to the point of them being charged, and the witnesses then shifts to the witnesses, them being interviewed, et cetera, should it be recorded real time so that we have an objective view of the handling of these cases?
I mean, my answer is that unequivocally yes. Transparency is key. I mean, when a system refuses to be transparent, you have to ask yourself who that is serving and why. If there is nothing to hide, then the system should hide nothing. Our public servants should have nothing to hide. I mean, you're talking about police cameras. In Maryland, courts have cameras, but that footage is not allowed to be disseminated. You know, we have footage, for example, from Adnan's latest appeal hearing, and his attorney is not allowed to make it public. Why? This is a court proceeding. It's a public court proceeding. What is happening here? Yeah, absolutely. I unequivocally, I mean, Adnan, the interrogations that were done, there's no recording of Adnan's interrogation. There's an audio recording of the witness's interrogation, no video recording. But absolutely, I mean, that is the best way to to minimize and help mitigate some of these issues.
And most states now will make sure that an interrogation of a suspect is recorded, video and audio. You saw that in Making a Murderer case with the young man. But I think it's probably impractical to video and record every single interaction with the police and the witnesses. And in this case, I am certain that said body camera or some would have been turned off when they were threatening these people. So yes, that goes a long way. But I do think that fundamentally, if there is tunnel vision in a case, which is what we have on this table, if there is a laser focus on one person, corners will be cut, the Constitution will be busted, and justice will be served. And in my case, in Dwayne's case, this phone record is what's called Brady evidence. It's under Brady versus Maryland, a Supreme Court case saying that exculpatory evidence has to be turned over to the defense at trial. And it's a good reason for that. But it's a moral hazard. Think of it. Prosecutor has this in his room. No one's around. I mean, I tell my kids, character is what you do when no one's looking. And this man looks at this. I don't know if this is what happened, but he says, and throws it away. It's a moral hazard because he wants a conviction in a high-profile case. It's the just and right thing to turn it over, but there's no video that's going to make that happen. There's no camera. That's an indictment on the human condition. And that goes to racial bias, injustice, bad lawyering, intellectual disability, which Dwayne had, all these things put together. The whole system almost broke an innocent, decent man. And it took a law firm, my prior law firm, who probably spent $1 million or more pro bono on legal fees, experts, and those things. And not many law firms are willing to do that kind of work. And I didn't have Serial, which I would have loved, and I'm glad that you put the sunshine on this, because your story is something that is across the country. Dwayne is a very simple man, very just I love the man dearly, and he said to me, the man, a few words, he said, Brian, there are more like me. And I get letters and calls a lot, and I'm sure you do too. And it breaks my heart that I can't say yes to everybody. But there's more like him out there.
We want to get to questions, and I know people are starting to line up. So go ahead. Let's start. Go ahead.
Yes, I want to ask her what she thinks of Sharia law and whether it's compatible with our Constitution, our Bill of Rights.
So that is completely unconnected to the conversation we're having today. And I would be happy to talk about it with you on the side.
I spent 11 months in prison, and I know what hell is, because prison can cure addiction, but I have MS, and it can't cure MS. And I've been through hell, and I know that we got to know who's coming to our country now. We got to know if they're going to contribute to our great nation or not. We got to know who these people are.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your comments. We're discussing two books on the criminal justice system with these authors, and I think there are other people that want to ask them some questions. So if you could, let's move on to the next questioner, if that's okay. We're really on limited time.
But please come talk to me afterwards.
Yeah. They're going to be here. Yeah. They are going to be here. Yes.
I have questions.
I have a question that goes to the details, maybe too much, but I was curious in the case of the telephone call, why the record or the telephone company didn't have the same, they didn't turn over their whole records, presumably, and why they had nothing for you to find.
Sure. So the offense took place in 2003, and the DA subpoenaed them in 2003 and turned those records over to the DA. And as I said, that was on their constitutional duty to turn it over. Dwayne's trial lawyer did not issue a subpoena to the phone company. And I wish she would have. And by the time I got involved in the case, many, many years later, the phone company told me they had already purged all the records from 2003. And so it broke my heart in a lot of ways, because if the defense lawyer would have listened to Dwayne, subpoenaed the phone company in 2003, it may not have taken all this to get there. Oh, again, the DA submitted that to the court ex parte, meaning we didn't get it, and received the document without us knowing. And as I said, it ended up in a garage a la John Grisham thriller.
And one thing about the book, the case that Brian represented, which he just barely mentioned, which I think is probably very significant, is that one of the folks killed is a police officer.
Right. So
a white police officer and a black defendant.
Right. It's and I say prayers for the man's family, Officer Charles Clark, all the time. A horrible double murder that should never have happened. But if you have a black defendant, indigent, intellectually disabled, no good counsel, and a white police officer shooting, that is the hardest criminal case to win, I think. And in fact, I look back and I talk to our teammates, I say, can you believe it? And that's why when I got to the car the first day after death row, I threw up, because I believed I'd watch him die, which is why I wrote this book, in part, because I wanted the world to know that the system is broken and that Texas executed an innocent man. But this ending is a lot better.
So what is your, in terms of a fix for the flaws that you see, what's the most, we could talk all day about this, but you know, what are the big items that might make some difference to bring about a fair and just result?
I mean, you know, look, like I said, every link on this chain is rusty or completely broken, from bail reform to juvenile justice. I mean, like, it is kind of overwhelming. But if there were two things that I could tackle first, it would be the issues of transparency and accountability. It makes me sick to my stomach that we have over and over again cases in which prosecutors have committed Brady offenses purposefully, and they've gone on to become judges. They shouldn't hold law licenses anymore. When you purposefully, what can be the justification for holding onto a document? That means you know this person is telling the truth and is innocent, and he's going to be executed. That person should not hold a law license. I don't know what happened to the prosecutor in your case. Over and over again. So we have a big deficit in terms of like holding, and we see this with police officers often, right? We, like, over the last number of years, we see over and over again, we see video footage of black men in this country being hurt, brutalized by police officers on video, and we can't get indictments. So there is a severe lack of accountability. If you have accountability, if you say, wait, you know what, you can commit a Brady violation, if a judge says you have committed a Brady violation, you should lose your law license. I think that would be a good start. It might put some fear of God or losing their license in that person's heart, but it never happened. The police officers in Adnan's case, who not only coerced this witness, but have a pattern of this behavior. Another defendant, they did the same thing too, very similar. They coerced a woman, and they told her, we're going to take away your children if you don't testify against this defendant. They got their conviction, okay? Years later, this man was exonerated. 2015, he was exonerated, right here in Baltimore. And those officers paid no price for it. One of them is still a state employee. The other one is living on pension, right? There's no accountability. And transparency is the other thing. I mean, I agree with you that, you know, transparency doesn't solve everything. Like you said, these moral dilemmas that are in the dark, what are you going to do when somebody's in the shadows? But I will say this, I don't know if I completely agree that it's not possible anymore to record every single interaction. I mean, we do in many ways, right? If you are under 25, you are probably recording every single thing you ate for breakfast. I mean, we have a capacity in terms, because of digital recording devices and the clouds and all these things, that I feel like you can do it. But we need a shift in the public sentiment on these issues. We have to go from wanting to be hard on crime to getting it right.
Totally.
And that's a big part of this. And so connected to that is the storytelling, is the book writing, is the podcasting, is introducing people to the public, to these people as human beings and humanizing them, because we do throw them away.
Brian, what do you see as the significant?
I agree with a lot of what every single thing. First of all, we got to get rid of the death penalty, because it almost took a decent man's life. But what I agree with you on accountability. There's only been 2 DAs who've ever gone to jail for withholding evidence. Ken Anderson in Texas, who did 10 days, in the Michael Morton case, 10 days. Come on now. And Ken Nifong, you might know from the Duke LaCrosse case, did 1 day. And there's been there's legislation in California about criminalizing this conduct. My wife is a former prosecutor, and I love her. And she told me she'd never hid evidence. But it doesn't mean that others aren't doing it. And so I think you need real teeth. You need disbarment, the threats of those things, because right now they enjoy civil immunity, and largely they get to move forward. And so I think we do need a harder accountability. But what I think is the biggest point, though, is a critical shift in mindset. Okay? You know, Dwayne was a black life that did not matter until our team decided it mattered. And he would have been executed, and nobody would be any the wiser if we didn't step up, our team. And this country has inherent bias. We have to flip. Have to. I give this speech to law students and to college students, and I say, you You are the change to erase these racial biases of the past and move forward. So that is what I think really needs to happen. That's more amorphous than it is actual real, but I do think, and that's why I tell the story, for folks to be inspired to make that change, to advocate, to donate money to the places that make these changes and policy changes, and to say, you know what, enough is enough. And so that's why I wrote the story, and that's why you wrote the story, I'm sure, to let the world know that these stories are out there. Yeah. And so that's what needs to happen.
You know, I wanted to ask this question, guy. The other side of this is, you know, look, you know, we have police officers, hundreds of thousands of them all over the country. They're not paid great salaries in most cases. We put an awful lot of expectation on them, and they're not lawyers. They have some training. Some of them build their investigative experience through years of work. But how do you respond to that? That says, look, you know, we're dealing with a system that's built on, you know, police departments that are, you know, not terribly well paid, public defenders that aren't terribly well paid, may not have that experience. How do you respond to that?
Well, I don't know. If I wasn't on C-SPAN, I might say something else, but they know right from wrong, though. And I think, you know, the vast majority of the officers in the country do a great job and keep us safe, but the ones that don't make them all look bad. And I think the cultural shift needs to happen. The problem is, guys, 97% of federal cases end up in police. Think about that. I do a lot of federal criminal work. 97%, which just means it's a mill. You investigate, they plea, they go to jail. Investigate, they plea, they go to jail. And so it becomes desensitized to the bigger issues of race and justice and why are we doing this? But until we change that mindset and make people realize that just because someone is a minority in an inner city means they're not a criminal, until that changes, it's not going to get any better. But I will say also, public defenders need to be paid more, because I had to leave that office because I had children and couldn't afford to live on mac and cheese and peanut butter and jelly anymore. But it's always more politically popular to pay a prosecutor more money. And there's a thing in a book about that, but it's never popular to pay a public defender. But they have to, because they play a real critical role.
Brian, you have a chapter on Scalia. It's called Scaliaism. I think you mentioned it more than once, but just briefly talk about that.
Well, again, maybe off camera might be better, but as a good Catholic and Christian man, I prayed for his soul when he passed. But his rulings on the death penalty are not great. He ruled it is not unconstitutional to execute someone who's determined to be innocent. I guess theoretically it might be constitutionally true, but it's a betrayal of what I believe to be the deep Catholic faith that I hold. He also said that in one case, Henry McCullum was going to have an honorable or deserved death because he had done something wrong to a child, and death penalty was good for him, and he was later exonerated. And so I say in the book that despite, you know, his legacy, I think his legacy also potentially contributed to the execution of innocent men. And so as a Catholic, of course, I mourned his passing, but I do not mourn the fact that he's no longer on the court. And so that's about the most I'll say, but you have to buy the book to read the rest of the chapter. Thanks.
And Rabia, because I know you've already touched on this about religion and ethnicity as it plays in the story of Adnan Syed. That was in 1999. Yeah. It's now 2017, and the climate is very different in this country. What's the risk for people of different ethnicity and religion as it pertains to the American criminal justice system?
Well, I think it's certainly fair to say, you know, a lot of people say, well, this is before 9/11. There wasn't a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment, and we don't have the same kind of sensitivities that we do on these issues since 9/11. But that's not necessarily true. It's not that we were free of certain biases. I remember growing up, and like the seminal movie that showed the dynamic between a Muslim man and women was Not Without My Daughter. Does everybody remember that movie? Yes. And I remember, I mean, to this, and I think I was a kid when it came out. To this day, when I speak at churches and synagogues, they ask me, what about that movie? Does that really happen? I'm like, it happens everywhere, by the way. I mean, like, you know, men and women have, you know, husbands and wives and mothers and fathers fight over their children and abscond with them, and this happens all over the place. But it's not, you know, so those things existed, but even though there is there's a risk here in terms of, like, there is certainly, and polling shows very, very high anti-Muslim sentiment and suspicion. I mean, like, I think we've already experienced that tonight, this morning. But I will say this, the communities are also better prepared. We are aware, I'm sorry, I think that's my 5-week-old baby over there. I'm doing this for you, kid. that we are better prepared for it. In '99, we did not have the organizational structure. We knew when that happened in the bail hearing, we were like, oh my God, what just happened? But what do we do about it? Right. Now we have the kinds of civil rights organizations that could do something about it. Recently, in the most recent, when his conviction was overturned, the judge actually noted what happened in that bail hearing and said that was unconstitutional. It was wrong what happened to that 17-year-old man. So now we're much more aware of it. We're better prepared to fight it. And so I think that we, in a way, I feel like it's less risky on that way. I think we've seen this even with the executive orders on immigration. You see so much awareness of like how this is impacting communities because we're able to tell our own stories. And we have many, many allies now.
Go ahead.
Thank you. First, I wanted to thank the three of you for being on this panel. It's a fascinating and very timely topic. My name is Michael Glass. I actually represent two of the officers in the civil suit against the prosecutor, and I certainly have my view on absolute immunity that prosecutors enjoy. And Brian, you touched on it, but can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on absolute immunity and perhaps explain what that is?
Sure. So in civil cases, when you sue for wrongful conviction and such, a prosecutor is not personally is immune, so you can't sue him and take his or her possessions or sue him for money. And I think that there needs to be more teeth to those types of things in which there should be what officers have, which is qualified immunity, I think, where you can have, if it shows that they went beyond the bounds, then that person can be civilly held liable. Because until there's teeth, until there's actually something looming behind you, then I think a prosecutor who is looking to get ahead in a high-profile case, looking to get convictions, it's cool. I have a couple at home too. It's all good.
No, not my baby, but still, her baby, but it's okay.
It's all good, right? I don't even hear it anymore. But I think there has to be real teeth, whether it's disbarment, investigations, even criminal conduct. I think until there's that, I think the ends will justify the means in high-profile cases, unfortunately. It's not just for Dwayne, though. Think about it. Ted Stevens, a senator from Alaska. They withheld Brady evidence in that case, and they had Williams and Connolly, the best law firm for criminal defense you can get. Happened to the rich, happened to the poor, because it's the theme of laser-focused tunnel vision. But I think there should be an expansion of potential reduction of immunity for prosecutors.
We'd like to thank the authors very much and they are going to be here. I saw your hand go up. Brian Stolarz and Rabia Chaudry, they are going to be both talking about the criminal justice system from their perspective of being, pretty deep dive into it. So we thank you all for watching on C-SPAN, and the authors will be here for some book signing. Thank you.
And that wraps up a discussion on criminal justice from the 15th Annual Annapolis Book Festival. Now in just a few minutes, Book TV will be back live with former Maryland State Legislator Mark Shriver, who's written a book about Pope Francis.